Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 2 video. The videos for this course will essentially serve as a way of understanding your assignments. So right now we're going to be talking about the critical quantitative analysis, part 1. Critical quantitative analysis in general is all about reading articles in your topic area that you can add to your lit review. So there's like a lot of, we're trying to get that overlap going. This can, of course, lend a hand to your qualifying exam too. But there's also a whole other thing we're trying to do here around learning how to critique quantitative research. So if you open up the critical quantitative analysis part 1 assignment, it is in Blackboard under materials, under the folder that says syllabus. As you open it up, I want you to have a look at the questions that are asked. Think about which areas do you already know something about? What areas can you make a tentative guess? What do you want to know more about? So take a minute, you can pause the video to really look through it for a moment and look at each bullet point. Okay, so here it is. There's a lot of text here just to kind of help explain exactly what these things are. Now, when you write up your first article answering these questions, you can actually use bullet points just like this. So you can actually, you don't have to just write it up like an essay. You can just say, in fact, I want you to say, number 1, is a study design identified and appropriately applied, and then write up your answer underneath number 1. But all of this text I want you to delete. So you don't leave my own text there. So just looking through it, you're going to be thinking about the study design, you're going to be thinking about the assumptions, the sample, the positioning of students or other subjects, validity, and statistical analysis. So those are all the things you'll be thinking about as you read your article. And we're going to be unpacking these slowly over the course. So this is due in a few weeks. You won't actually know everything about everything in a few weeks. I don't know everything about everything in many years. So we're going to be slowly building our understanding of each of these. And in today's video, we'll talk a little bit about positioning, and we're going to talk a little bit about assumptions. And then, later next week, probably we're going to cover validity, and weeks following, we're going to cover sampling. So your first time of writing this up, you may not know everything perfectly. You're just going to have your best shot at it. And then you'll be building your knowledge. And you'll have, of course, my feedback there. Okay, so I asked you during week 1 to think about this idea of being positioned, or how we frame people in our research. And I hope you did a little bit of thinking about that as you did the readings and did some discussion about that. And I want to I'm going to compare a couple of articles in terms of positioning. So this is an article by Hanishek, who is someone he's a quantitative researcher that I find to be rather frustrating in terms of how he positions students. So if you'll notice here that he's citing himself, that this article suggests that an increased Black concentration in schools has a detrimental effect on Black achievement, although racial composition does not seem to affect either whites or Hispanics. Now, notice here, think about the way someone reading this might come away with in terms of their perspective about Black students. Really think about that for a second. And it's the same thing as this discussion of the achievement gap, right? This is a deficit way. It is a subtractive way to talk about a group of students. And so whenever we see the way, this is a positioning, right? Black students in this study are positioned in a very particular way without any caveats about the societal systems that create these kinds of inequities and that foster injustice that results in these kinds of effects, right? So there's this tacit assumption, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, about where this is coming from. Contrast this with Dixon Roman, who you're reading. who says, regardless of whether the test taker responds correctly, inherited sociocultural and historical conditions of structural relations that produce responses and subsequently the quantitatively estimated test scores are often overlooked. So in some ways, Dixon-Roman is in direct dialogue with Hanushek, right? Like, I mean, he's not saying, look, Hanushek, what's your deal? You need to acknowledge that the sociocultural and historical conditions actually create and reproduce these kinds of test scores, right? He didn't say, look, Hanushek, but basically he's saying that. That's how academics do it. They're like all, super, coy about it. But basically, this is an argument going on in the literature, and you can see that Dixon-Roman is acknowledging the mechanisms of oppression that are going on in society, whereas Hanushek is positioning students in a deficit way. That is something you're going to need to be looking at in your articles that you're reading. Okay, so the next thing I want you to think about is assumptions. Again, I've asked you to think a little bit about this, and now I'm going to go over a couple of ideas around assumptions. And this is going to take a while to build your understanding of this. When researchers do research, we all make assumptions, right? So for example, one assumption we might make is if you do X, Y will happen. So for example, if you give parents choice, there will create competition for schools and schools will get better. Okay, that's an assumption about the way we operate schools. That's a neoliberal assumption embedded in the charter school movement. Another thing researchers do all the time is this idea of P equals Q. So for example, one that's very common is that test scores equal learning, or that achievement equals learning, or that test scores equal achievement, or that achievement is what everyone wants out of schools, right? So there's a lot of assumptions embedded in any kind of research or anything that uses test scores. So another example from Hanushek, my least favorite researcher, the estimation of accountability effects uses two elements. This is a paper he wrote, uses two elements of the NAEP testing. And the NAEP testing is like it's a test of reading and math that they do in 4th grade and 8th grade and 11th grade. 2 cohort observations for math growth and 2 for reading growth make it possible to create a panel of achievement growth in each subject. So notice that he's equating this test with achievement growth. And I mean, maybe you could make that argument, but again, there's no question about, well, what is achievement? Like how does a group of students answering multiple choice questions equal something called achievement? And what does achievement equal? Why are we studying achievement? Okay, so I just want you to chew on that for a little bit. We're not gonna, land on anything specific just yet. We're gonna just continually revisit the idea of assumptions and positioning throughout this class. And this again is a question in the critical quantitative analysis one for you to think about in terms of the article that you choose to read. Okay, so you are going to need to find an article, right? It needs to be on your topic so it can contribute to your literature review. It needs to be empirical and it needs to be quantitative. So you probably have some ideas rattling in your head about what each of those looks like, but abstract can be very sneaky. So we're gonna do a tale of 3 abstracts here so you can see maybe some things to look for as you're looking for these articles. Okay, so your topic is your topic. I can't talk to you too much about that. I mean, I can help you. Of course, you can send things to me and I can help you identify articles on your topic. But we're going to talk about empirical and quantitative. So here is an article. We are reading this in our class, Transforming Science Learning in Case of Low-Income Urban Racial Minority Classrooms. So let's read through it. Recent criticisms of the goal for science for all with regard to minority students have alluded to the onerous cultures of school science characterized by white, middle-class values that eschew personal everyday science experiences. Using critically oriented socio-cultural perspectives, this article explores the 6th grade classroom of a male white science teacher in an urban school that serves only minority students. Note here, by the way, that she just was talking about the theoretical framework, just in case you were wondering about that right there. Let's see, using the notion of figure worlds, actually sort of another aspect of the theoretical framework. We look at what learning science looks like in Mr. M's classroom. Now, this is an indication that this is empirical. This is an empirical work, right? Because they are looking in the classroom and trying to figure out what's going on, and how he provides structural support. So that's good. We know this is empirical. The question is this quantitative? So that's a question that you'll have to continue to think about as we look at the next abstract. Okay. Now this one, which we're also reading, says the primacy of the scientific method in educational research should be a concern for among educators. Sorry, I've got this super annoying annotation. Let's see, eraser, format, undo. Okay, sorry, I have to deal with that. Okay. The U.S. Department of Education has adopted a narrow view of scientific research and experimental design, an approach to framing research that constrains critical analysis of public policy. And then I'm going to skip the next sentence. Then he says, in this chapter, I propose an alternative approach to the use of quantitative research methods in educational policy research that is compatible with traditional quantitative methods, but is also a more balanced approach. Now, you might guess from the use of the word quantitative, multiple places, that this is about quantitative research. But the question is this empirical? And the answer is no. Notice here that there is nothing about gathering data. There's nothing about a particular study. There's nothing about studying Mr. M or a particular survey or anything, right? So this is actually kind of an essay on the use of quantitative methods. It's not empirical. So the abstract we just looked at before was empirical, but it was not quantitative. This abstract says, yeah, it's quantitative, but it's not empirical. They are very tricky about these things. Okay, here is a final abstract. We are reading this article in class. This one says, I'm going to skip the first sentence because it's setting out the overall frame of what they're going to study. All right. Now, look right here. As you encounter the second sentence, it says, this study utilizes a matched comparison group to design to examine the academic achievement and persistence of students enrolled in this particular program. Now, is that empirical? Yes, it is empirical, right? Because they're talking about a very particular study. In fact, they say this study, right? Results indicate the students on average earned higher grades. So results, also an indication that this is empirical. Now, this word right here, this helps us to see that this is quantitative because they say it's on average. Or higher grades, this is probably a quantitative measure. Higher cumulative grade point average, a quantitative measure, all right? So there's a lot of indicators in this abstract that this is a quantitative empirical article. And those are the kinds of things you're going to want to look for as you look for your article. So how do you find an article? I think this is a really important question. So you probably are used to, at this point, searching on Google Scholar for articles. I just plugged my computer into the internet because it's being a bit slow. You can actually search, obviously, for your topic area on Google Scholar, and you can then click on them and look for your. But I recommend, if you really are having trouble finding quantitative articles, you use things like, you can add the word effect, impact, scores into your search, or you can just look through the abstract to look for those kinds of words. Of course, you may also want to add the word equity or social justice into your search because those terms might get you the kinds of research you're looking for. Another way to go about it, and I super recommend this for all of you, is that you look through specific journals. And I do this every time I do a review search. So here's 3 journals that are very highly regarded. American Educational Research Journal is probably the top research journal. Educational Researcher, I think, is number 3 or 4. And Educational Administration Quarterly is the top leadership in education journal. So what you do is you go to their website and you look through. You literally click on 2019 or 2018 and look through articles. The other thing you can do, of course, is you can use a search term on their website to find an article. And then you can try to figure out, then you know when you download that article that it is really going to work for you. So let's try it. Sorry, internet is being a little bit slow here, but we're working on it. A little bit too slow for this. So I will show you in class. Back to the slideshow. Back to the slideshow. Okay, so I just want to finish up with a couple of words about words, because quantitative researchers use a lot of words for the same thing. So just to kind of go over, so you're not super confused, okay? The big areas of quantitative research are tests and surveys. Tests can be called measures, instruments, and assessments. So those are other words that are used out in the literature for a test, a measure, an instrument, or an assessment. Like a researcher could be like, we administered the SPNS instrument to find out students' content knowledge, right? They mean a test. Surveys also can be called measures. So, we used a measure of student engagement. They mean a survey. They can be called scales. Then they would say, we used a student engagement scale. They can be called instruments, and they can be called questionnaires. And they can actually be called surveys sometimes. So just keep all those things in mind when you are looking at research that has surveys. And then finally, a lot of times questions on surveys are called items. Same on tests. Like any kind of question on a test is called an item. A question on a survey is called an item. So hopefully that will help with the translation. Okay, finally, I'm just going to let you go. I want you to think about, for the next couple of weeks, number 5 on the critical quantitative analysis, which is about validity. And I want you to think about, what does it mean to have validity and why is it important? And as you think about that, do the readings for next week, which is Whelan chapter 3.